Today's topic is about what is truth? What is the objective reality of truth? What does truth really mean? So our core passage actually is going to be from John chapter 3, verse 21. If any of you want to turn there, let me see, I have it over here on the screen. If you don't, John chapter 3, verse 21. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light, so that it may be seen plainly that what they have done has been done in the sight of God. Now this is, of course, the passage where Jesus is talking to Nicodemus. And Nicodemus is, this great teacher of Israel, and Jesus is talking to him about what it means to be born again. What it means to be born in the Spirit. And Nicodemus is all confused. He's like, born again? What does that even mean? Do you mean like go back into my mother's womb and come back? And okay, first of all, no. Secondly, Jesus was like, no, you're completely getting this wrong. If you're the teacher of Israel and you don't seem to understand what I'm talking about. And Jesus was talking about the truth of a spiritually new birth. And when that happens, there is a change that takes place in us that should alter the way we look at and perceive the world. Several years ago, my professor of logic and comparative religions at Biola University asked us a question in the class. I'll never forget the question. I've remembered it all these years. He asked, are you committed to Christianity or are you committed to the truth? And he said, if eternity depended on it, and if you had to pick one, which one would you pick? Now, obviously, as I heard him say that, I realized that it's not a trick question, but it's a question that's designed to provoke us to think deeply about the most fundamental things of life. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about, okay, how do we assess these fundamental things of life? How do we determine what we can believe and what we cannot believe? One of the most iconic moments, I think, in the narrative of Scripture is that amazing conversation between Jesus and Pilate. Let me just read that passage for you. It's from verse 33, John chapter 18. Pilate then went back inside the palace. He summoned Jesus and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Then Jesus asked him, "Is that your own idea?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied, "Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" And Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "Ah, you are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." And then that incredible question by Pilate, "Quid e veritas?" What is truth? And with that, he turned around and he walked away. I don't think Pilate realized the irony of that moment when he asked that question and walked away, because the very epitome and the personification of truth was standing right there in front of him. And he asked, "What is truth?" And he turned and he walked away. We live in a culture and time where truth has become something to be debated, something to be scorned. As a society, we've become confused about the truth. Issues that have historically been considered as universally true for everyone are now being debated. Gender, marriage, sexuality. There's confusion about the truth in politics. There's this whole fake news phenomenon, right? There's a lot of name calling from across the aisles. The right doesn't trust the left doesn't trust the right. We can't even have a civil conversation with people anymore. There's confusion about the truth in Hollywood, in the entertainment industry. So for example, just a small example, how many of you are aware of this Me Too movement that's kind of going on? in the industry. It's basically a movement. For those of you who don't know it, it's something that started a few months ago, with a few women coming out and saying that they were actually sexually exploited by this really big name director and all that, and that's good. I think those kinds of things need to come out, and these people need to be exposed. But I couldn't help think a lot of these women who complained about being sexually exploited did not mind portraying those kinds of roles on screen. You see what I'm saying? And a lot of these people who came out and said that there's all these directors and producers who are abusing people and things like that, none of them named any names. And I remember Alicia and I were sitting and talking about this and saying, okay, it's good, this needs to come out, but why are we not naming names? Why are we not calling out the directors? Why are we not calling out the producers? And it just seemed like there was this conflict of interest there for them, because they're still in the industry. They don't want to lose their job. They don't want to lose their fame. You know, there's just this confusion about a lot of issues. Another example, this movie 50 Shades of Grey came out a few years ago. And some of the reviews that were coming from a lot of, ironically, I actually saw the numbers for it. The majority of the reviews coming from the women were words like bold, provocative, courageous, empowering, liberating. And I was genuinely surprised, because I'm thinking, what is it about being blindfolded and gagged and whipped by a man? How is that empowering? How is that liberating? Do you see the level of confusion that's happening in our culture? Okay? But here's, so the important thing to remember is, look, it's so easy for the human heart to get wrapped up in our own personal interests and our own personal agendas and get blindsided to the truth of the greater reality around us. Okay? Truth, by definition, is objective. So what does that mean? It means a couple of things. A propositional statement or a truth claim is either true or it's not. Okay, there's no such thing as my truth, your truth, their truth, and all that. It's either true or it's not. In fact, I recently heard a Christian leader. He's a pretty big name, and he was giving a sermon, and he was talking about God, and he was talking about the cross, and he said, the judgment of God is true, but the mercy of God is more true. Now, I know where this is coming from. Obviously, we have, this happens a lot. We try to, soften God a little bit. We don't want to talk about some of the more difficult attributes of God. We try to attribute only love, kindness, gentleness, mercy, and all those warm, fuzzy characteristics to God. But I remember thinking to myself, wait a minute. What does more true mean? He said, the judgment of God is true, but the mercy of God is more true. How is something more true? It's either true or it's not. And how can we isolate one particular characteristic of God when the cross actually illuminates all of his characteristics? Does that make sense? So propositional statement or a truth claim is either true or it's not. And here's the second part to that. The truth of something does not depend on what we think or how we feel about it. Let me repeat that again. The truth of something does not depend on what we think or how we feel about it. It doesn't matter whether we don't think that the sun rises in the east. Whether we believe that or not, the sun rises in the east. Okay? So it's important to make a distinction here. There's a difference between objective truth and subjective truth. To say that something is objectively true means that it is absolutely and independently true for all people at all times. I was listening to a student conference, and one of panelists, the speakers, asked the student from the audience, he said, do you consider it morally wrong to torture or kill an innocent child? And this guy stood up and he said, he's a university student. He stood up and he said, I would feel uncomfortable with that personally, but I could not in good conscience say that it was wrong. Now, where is this coming from? We're going to touch on this in a little bit. This is coming from this idea of your truth, my truth, and so forth. Okay, and we're going to go and unpack that a little bit more. But objective truth means it doesn't matter if it's only the truth. There's no your truth and my truth and somebody else's truth. There's only the truth. That's what objective truth means. It means that it is absolutely and independently true for all people at all times. Now, to say that something is subjectively true means that it can differ from person to person. It can be different individualistically and relatively according to every person. My son and I were recently having this conversation. Obviously we like to eat some spicy food at home, and we had some jalapenos on the table, and we had some sriracha sauce, and my 7-year-old was absolutely adamant that jalapenos was more spicy than sriracha sauce, and I felt the opposite. And he was like, no, but you can't disagree, Dad, this is the truth. And so we had to have this talk about what is subjective truth. Subjective truth means it can differ from person to person. What you may think is spicy, someone else may not. And so that's what it means for something to be subjectively true. So remember the paradigm. Objective truth is either or. Either it's true or it's not. Subjective truth can be both and. It can be different. Now, some of you at this point might be sitting here thinking, okay, this is all very elementary stuff. Why are we talking about all of this? We know all this already. I think it's important to understand this because the culture is not clear on this. The culture has turned every objective truth into their own subjective reality. We live in a time where our individual opinions and perspectives and feelings supersede reality. It doesn't matter if you're genetically or biologically a boy. If you feel like a girl, then you're a girl. Okay? You guys know about what's going on now in our culture with all of this. It doesn't matter whether that's a living human being inside of you. If it is inconvenient to you, then it is not a human being. You get rid of it. What is truth? I think the spirit of Pilate's question resonates strongly in our culture even today, or at least should resonate. We should constantly be asking ourselves, when we look at the culture and we look at all these things going around us, we have to have the courage to ask, what is the truth here? Not what is good for me, not what is convenient for our team, but what is the truth here? We live in a time when our individual opinions, perspectives, feelings supersede reality. We have all these social justice buzzwords now, right? Like microaggressions and trigger warnings and things like that. So for those of you who are not familiar with the term microaggression, it means that if someone implicitly says something that might offend you in some way, even if they didn't mean to offend you, and if it offends you, then that is an offense. It doesn't matter whether your motive was there or not. What you did was wrong because my feelings were hurt. Okay? Obviously, some of you here know we moved here from California, nuttiest state in the U.S. I've seen a lot of nut cases over there, and some of the nuttiest people are in the university campuses. And I remember going with one of my friends to the UCLA campus over there, and they had actually cordoned off a particular section of the university, and I remember talking to someone and asking, what's going on over there? And they said, oh, that's been barricaded away. And I said, obviously it's been barricaded away. Why? And she was kind of hesitant to say because she's from UCLA, and she was like, well, it's okay, it's a safe space. I said, safe space. Okay, I've heard that term before. What is it a safe space from? And it turned out that a couple of days ago, there was a conservative speaker who had come there to talk about the First Amendment and about certain constitutional truths. And a lot of kids were so offended by that they called it hate speech. And so the university administration created safe spaces for them so they could hang around in that area, and as long as you're in that area, nobody's supposed to come and talk to you about anything. They're supposed to leave you alone. There's a bunch of Play-Doh, crayons, coloring books. I am not kidding. These are for 20-year-olds. I am not making this up. We're talking about 20-year-olds sitting in cordoned off safe spaces, playing with Play-Doh and coloring books because they want to retreat from these offensive words that this person is saying that's really hurting them. Okay, you're seeing all these, this is where you kind of get the term snowflake from, right? How many of you have heard of that term snowflake? That you're so delicate that someone even touches you and you just melt. Okay? This is what happens when a culture loses track of objective reality and subjectivizes everything. You see what's happening? The idea that knowledge, truth, or morality exists only within the context of a culture, society, or history, and therefore are not absolute in nature. This is the idea of relativism. Relativism has become a very strong phenomenon here in the West. You heard Sean talk about this in the video. If the Quran was true for the Muslim, then it was true for him. He could believe it. The question is not anymore about is something fundamentally true. The question is it true for you? If it's true for you, then it's true. That's all that matters. This idea is called relativism. It's the idea that knowledge, truth, or morality exists only within the context of culture, society, or history, and therefore cannot be absolute in nature. This is otherwise called the true for you but not for me syndrome. And it goes everywhere, right? It gets into religion, it gets into politics, it gets into all kinds of everyday life issues. Again, going back to kind of the whole gender discussion, it doesn't matter. If I look like a boy, if I talk like a boy. The truth of the matter is, I woke up this morning and I feel like a girl, so I have the right to walk into the girls' restroom and use that restroom tonight. Relativism. The problem with relativism, though, is that it cannot be lived consistently. If you are truly a relativist, who thinks that every person has their own truth, then you cannot make any moral judgments at all. But have we ever seen anybody like that? Have we ever seen any person who does not make any moral judgments? You cannot live like that. You cannot consistently live with relativism. This happens a lot even when it comes to religious issues, right? There are people who I've heard who come and say, well, all religions are basically the same. It's just different paths to the top of the mountain. First of all, people who say that, I think they don't know anything about any religion, because religions are fundamentally different on some of the most core issues. What Buddhism teaches about salvation is very different from what Islam teaches, which is very different from what Christianity teaches. They're not all the same. And when a person comes to, for example, if a person comes to you and says, I just think that people should be free to do however they feel. If it feels right in their heart, then they should do it. Who are we to judge? Here's the knockdown question, right? As soon as you get asked, who are you judge, we just retreat. We're like, oh boy, we don't want to deal with this. But here's the problem. When you ask me, who are you to judge, you're judging me. Right? You're contradicting yourself. You see why you can't live consistently like that? When you say, people should be free to do whatever they want. If it feels right in their heart, they should just do it. Okay, at this point, I have a question. I really feel like punching you right now. Can I do it? What do you think that person's going to say? If they were a true relativist, they would say, absolutely go for it. Because it feels right in your heart. You should go for it. Have you ever heard anybody say that? No. You cannot live consistently as a relativist. So it is not true. Even though people give lip service to this idea that this is your truth, this is my truth, who are we to judge? People can live however they please. If that is true, as soon as you see something that offends you or hurts you or feels like you've been wronged, you immediately make a judgment. Why? Because we are moral beings. That's how God created us. God created us to be moral, rational beings with discernment. So let's not pretend like there are no morals or that we shouldn't make judgments. Moral judgments are impossible within relativism. Ethics is impossible within relativism. I love this quote. It was by G.K. Chesterton several decades ago when he said, "Whenever you remove any fence, always pause long enough to ask why it was put there in the first place." It's a very profound thought, And when you look at our culture, we've been uprooting fences for several decades now. Fences that have existed since the beginning of time. We are now asking all kinds of questions about, should this even be there? This is oppression. This is limiting people. It's limiting their freedom. Let's remove it. And when we eliminate God's standard for truth, what does it do? It produces chaos and confusion. God has set into effect certain laws and certain realities and certain truths that actually provide us a safety fence. As long as we have those, we can be safe. There will not be order. There will not be confusion. That actually makes me think. A couple of years ago, there was this movie that came out called The Purge. I don't want to go into the details of the movie. Essentially, the basic premise of the movie is this is some sort of, not too distant future where there's a new set of founding fathers for America, and they've basically figured out that the reason for all of this crime and all of these problems in our society is because people don't have an outlet for their anger and rage. And if you give them an outlet for their anger and rage, then it'll solve all of those issues because now they've vetted everything out. And so what they created was this one day in a year called the Purge. And on that day, for, is it 12 hours or something like that, for a specific period of time, like 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. or something like that, all law enforcement, all emergency services, everything will be shut down. So basically, there is no law. The law will basically go to sleep for 12 hours and people are free to do whatever they want. What do you think happened? There was anarchy. There was murder. Everything, every bad thing that could happen under the sun happened in those 12 hours. That tells us actually something about human nature. I think even though Hollywood gives us a lot of baloney a lot of times, they do pick up on certain truths. And it's one of those truths that they accurately picked up on is if you remove the checks and balances, human nature does not create utopia, it creates dystopia. If you remove all the safety fences in place, it doesn't immediately turn into this beautiful Neverland. It turns into chaos. It turns into hell. As Christians, we are called to be the salt of the earth and the light to the world. We should always stand for truth. We must avoid the temptation to succumb to the pressures of relativistic culture. We must have the courage to call reality what it is. Now, I know this is kind of a difficult thing because And I actually think this is one of the good traits of American culture is we're very respectful of each other. That's good. That's really good. I wish other countries were like that. I think though somewhere along the line we went a little bit too far. Somewhere along the line political correctness crept in. Somewhere along the line we stopped speaking truth to each other. You know, one of my most favorite theologians, he just passed away actually several months ago. His name is R.C. Sproul, and he actually made this one comment. He said, "We cannot kill truth in the streets for the sake of peace." We cannot kill truth in the streets for the sake of peace. Peace is important, but truth is more important. And I think we've tried to get along with everybody. We've tried to open the doors for it. And this is a complicated issue. Look, I'm not beating up on Western culture. I'm an American myself, but we have to have that self-reflection to see, okay, we as Christians living in this culture, how can we respond? When Jesus tells us to be the light to the world and the salt of the earth, if we become like the culture, what does that mean? It means we've lost our saltiness. We're flavorless. We can't be like that. What does salt do? Salt brings out the true flavor of whatever you put it in, right? But salt also does something else. It preserves. It keeps something in its original state. See, and I think that's why that's such a brilliant analogy that Jesus uses. We're supposed to be the salt of the earth. Wherever Christianity has stayed, it has brought out the best of that culture. And it has preserved the original true elements of that culture. But as soon as Christianity was removed from there, everything went bad. There's lots of historical examples we can look through. We don't even have the time to go through all of those today, but every era and every regime and every time in human history where Christianity existed in one place and then was removed from there, that place has descended into chaos. We need to learn to have the courage to call reality what it is. The most fundamental questions of reality are actually objective in nature. They're not subjective questions. They're objective questions. Is there such a thing as truth? Does God exist? Did Jesus really rise from the dead? All of those questions will fit within the either-or paradigm, if you notice. Either there is truth or there is not. Either God exists or he doesn't. Either Jesus rose from the dead or he didn't. This is what the Apostle Paul says, right? He refers to that truth claim. He says, if Jesus did not rise from the dead, what did he say? We of all people should be pitied, and our faith is in vain. We have it all wrong. We have messed up. We should be pitied the most if Jesus did not rise from the dead. But he did. That's a different class. We're going to talk about the resurrection. We're going to talk about unfalsifiable proofs for how the resurrection happened. We're going to walk through all the individual skeptical claims that people make. Oh, it was a wrong tomb. Oh, they mistook him. It was a wrong body. Oh, the disciples forgot which tomb. We're going to break each and every one of those critiques away. And once we get all that baloney out of the way, you will see the historical reliability of the cross and the empty tomb of Jesus is undeniable. Which means what? The Christian truth stands tall simply because of Jesus. You know, one of the virtues exalted in our culture today is freedom. Freedom is a good thing. I think as a person who came here as an immigrant, I'm now a U.S. citizen, but when I see a lot of other immigrants here who talk poorly about America and who denigrate American values, it really bothers me. It bothers me because they have forgotten where they came from. I recently had this conversation with one of my friends. She's also Indian, just like me. She moved here to the US and she was just going on and on, just really trashing American culture. And I was telling you, you have so many problems with our culture. Everything that you just said now, if you had said the same thing in the country that you and I are from, you'd be behind bars. The freedom that you have to criticize, the freedom that you have is the same freedom that you're using to criticize the people who gave you that freedom. I think we underestimate, we undervalue the freedom we have. There are a lot of places in the world there is no place in the world like America. There's no place in the world like America. And that is why we have always been a beacon of hope and freedom and ambition for people all over the world. Even at the border, any sort of illegal crossing that's happening at the border is only going in one direction. It's not going the other way. Nobody's dying to get into Mexico. Sorry, that was not meant to be a dig against Mexico. I was just trying to make a point that there's a specific reason why the United States has always been a beacon of hope and freedom. Is because when you touch down on these shores here, you are seen as a person who's made in the image of God. You are seen as a person who you have value simply because you're a human being. That is not the case in other countries. I know. I've been in other countries. I'm originally from India, but I was born and raised in the Middle East. I know the state of women in the Middle East. I know what kind of freedoms you have, what kind of things you can say and not say in those places. I've lived in India for several years. There is no place like here. Freedom is one of the virtues that has made America great. But, let's just pause there for a second and go all the way back in time to Genesis chapter 3. Remember that Satan dangled a carrot in front of Eve. Okay, listen to this part very carefully because this is going to tie into the nature of freedom. What did he say? We talked about the 1-2 punch, right? You remember I talked about this, about just like a boxer. This has been a standard for decades. This is a boxing methodology, the 1-2 punch. The first one is meant to rattle you. It's just to get you off your balance. The second one is to take you down. That was Satan's methodology in the garden. The first one was a jab. It was a question. Did God really say? What did it do? It rattled them. It rattled the first humans. It shook them off their feet a little bit. And then he came back with a lie. Surely you will not die. But when you go back to that passage and you listen to what Satan is saying, he offers something that's very appealing, that's very enticing. He says, you too can become like God. He's offering them a freedom that was never meant to be theirs. He's offering them a freedom that was not part of the human jurisdiction. What is he saying? He's appealing to their base instincts, and he's saying, he's keeping something from you. You're not really free because you don't have what he has. If you have what he has, you will be just like him. He offered freedom, but freedom with a lie. See, the carrot was freedom. But the methodology with which he dangled that in front of them was done with a lie. Did the lie bring them freedom? No, it brought them bondage. It brought us bondage. So what's the point of that? What does that have to do with freedom? Some of you may be thinking, what does that have to do with freedom? Here's what it has to do. The first humans wanted freedom so bad that they bought into a lie. Which means what? Our pursuit, our primary pursuit should not be freedom. Even as a nation, freedom is what makes us good. Yeah, freedom is what makes America amazing. Yes, it is true. But that is is not the epitome of what makes America. See, America is not good because it's great. America is great because it's good. You see that? When I say good, I mean that in a moral sense. America is morally good. I'm not saying we're perfect. Every nation has problems, but believe me, I've been to a lot. We are definitely on the right side of the spectrum. America is great because we're morally good. We had Judeo-Christian principles that were the foundations of this nation. And what's happening? We're drifting away from that. We're drifting away and we're becoming more and more confused. But that's why we have to go back to the truth. Back in the garden, this was the thing. The pursuit of freedom, devoid of the truth, created bondage. It didn't create freedom. It created bondage. See, this is why what Jesus said was revolutionary, right? Jesus says in John chapter 14, verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Going back to that religion example, religions will tell you that there are many paths to truth. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you this. Truth is not in a path, it's in a person. There is no path to truth. There is a person through whom you can have truth. That person is truth himself. He is truth personified. He is truth incarnate. This is why I think Pilate asked the greatest question that could ever be asked when he asked, what is truth? But he committed one of the greatest crimes by walking away from the epitome of truth that was standing right there in front of him. In John chapter 8, verse 32, Jesus says, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Now hang on, let's marinate on that a little bit. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. You see what Jesus is doing? He's equating your freedom with truth. But he's not reversed it. See, in our culture, we kind of put the horse before the cart. No, we put the cart before the horse. We put the cart before the horse. We're pursuing freedom first, and truth actually, if it matters at all, it comes after freedom. Just like how Sean said, right? How are we defining freedom in our culture? Freedom means the ability to do whatever I want, whenever I want, however I want. Nobody should tell me what to do. This is the truth. This is our cultural definition of freedom. But see, his response is revolutionary. And he's saying what? You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Meaning, if you want freedom, you pursue truth. Don't pursue freedom, pursue truth. And the truth will set you free. Oh, by the way, I'm truth. That's what he's saying. I'm truth. If you pursue freedom devoid of truth, you will get neither freedom nor truth. But if you pursue truth, you will get both truth and freedom. Write that down. That's worth writing down. If you pursue freedom devoid of truth, you will get neither freedom nor truth. But if you pursue truth, you will get both truth and freedom. There's a reason why Jesus called Satan the father of lies. I think while this applies even in a larger context to our lives and to our jobs and to our relationships and things like that, Jesus asked one of his disciples this question. He said, who do people say that I am? And I'll tell you this, we all believe lies in so many different ways, but some of the biggest lies we believe are actually about ourselves. There are lots of lies that the enemy gives us, that derails us, that confuses us, that causes chaos. Sometimes we have this immense capacity to tell ourselves lies, sometimes about ourselves. And this is why it's good for us to focus our eyes on Jesus. And just like Jesus, who do people say that I am? It's important for us to ask, well, Jesus, who am I? Who am I in you? That's what ultimately matters. Not what does my spouse think of me. Not what does my boyfriend or girlfriend think of me. Not what my colleagues think of me. What do you think? How does God look at us? How does God define us? And when we really come to a clarifying perspective on the truth about our own identity and where our own value and our own self-esteem comes from, then we have a freedom that truly liberates us to be who God meant us to be. Does that make sense? So while there are so many lies that we can buy into, one of the greatest lies we all have to battle in our everyday lives are lies about ourselves. And this is why it's important for us to consecrate ourselves before the truth. Because Jesus is the truth. He is the way. He is the life. And we want to go to Him and say, Lord, help us remove the blinders from our eyes. Help remove the blinders from our souls, from our heart, so that we can see clearly the cross. We can see clearly who you are. And our minds will be illuminated with your truth. Scripture talks about what's happening in our culture. If our founding fathers had a way to look at what is going on in our culture today, they would be flabbergasted. We're confused about gender, we're confused about marriage, we're confused about the most fundamental things that people have believed for thousands of years. The truth is what is going to set us free. And whenever we look at a situation, even at your workplace, even at the people, the relationships that you're having, always ask yourself that question. When people say something to you, you're having an intense conversation about something that is fundamentally important, the question that ultimately needs to float on the surface is, what is the truth here? Let's go ahead and pray. Father, we just come before you today, Lord. We just want to thank you so much. We pray and we glorify your name in everything we do, Lord. We have become confused as a culture with the truth, to the point where we are not even able to recognize it anymore. But your word says that our hearts have become dark, our minds have become futile, and we suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Maybe I should correct what I said. And it's not that we don't even know what the truth is anymore. I think we do, but we suppress it. We suppress the truth. Help us not to do that, Lord. Help us to lean on you. Help us to depend on you. Help to recognize that you are the truth, that your word is true, that everything you have already addressed, everything you have made the world the way it is. Man and woman, father and mother, marriage between two persons of the opposite sex, the beauty of life, the sanctity of life, these are all true and real and objective truths, Lord, that do not change, that has never changed since the beginning of time. And now we are deluding ourselves into thinking that all these things can be changed. And we hurt ourselves the most. Father, we pray that every day when we wake up, when we look at the news and we read all kinds of confusing things, all kinds of things that stir up anger within us and stir up just a sense of, I just give up, I just don't even know. I think our whole culture is going to hell in a handbasket. When we feel that sense of despair, Lord, remind us that we are meant to be the light to the world. We are meant to be the salt of the earth. And when we walk out the doors of our home, help us to be that light. Help us to be that salt. Yes, we should be careful about people's feelings. Yes, we want to always treat them with gentleness and respect. Yes, we always want to treat them with as a human being. But we cannot allow truth to die in the streets for the sake of peace. And sometimes that's going to cost us. It'll cost us relationships. It'll cost us a lot. But But Lord, we pray that you will help us to be convicted and help us to stay true to what the truth of reality is and the truth of who you are. We thank you, Jesus, and we ask you all this in your wonderful and precious name.